Oh, great. First Crystal Lake, now this creepy-ass place. Out of the frying pan, into the fire. Am I right? Sorry, dude. Bad choice of words. What is up, everybody? Welcome to the start of a new franchise for real horror. Today we begin with a look at the man of our dreams in A Nightmare on Elm Street. As you know, in the 1980s, the slasher genre was the biggest craze in horror. Tons of them were being churned out with no budget, looking to make a profit. But director Wes Craven, who at the time had been best known for The Last House on the Left and The Hills Have Eyes, had come up with an idea that stood out dramatically from the Halloween and Friday the 13th copycats. His source of inspiration was actually based on real-life events involving teenagers dying in their sleep.
In this particular case, a young man had a severe nightmare and told his parents, "I can't go back to sleep, I'm going to die, I just know it." And finally, the kid fell asleep, and they took him upstairs and put him to bed. And in the middle of the night, they heard screams and ran into the room. Literally before they got to him, he fell still and he was dead. What if there was somebody in his dream that was, who killed him, what killed him? I said, okay, so what if it's a guy? Just kind of pieced it together from there.
Wes had to shop his script for A Nightmare on Elm Street around for several years until Robert Shea, head of New Line Cinema, a small independent company at the time, showed interest. Little did they know they were setting the stage for one of the most popular horror franchises in history, along with an iconic villain. A likable young cast was brought in, including Johnny Depp in his first movie role, along with veterans John Saxon and Ronnie Blakely. The role of child murderer Fred Krueger was originally given to actor David Warner, but after having to drop out, Robert Englund was selected to don the burned makeup, sweater, and fedora. It was a portrayal he would continue to return for almost 20 years. With an ambitious script, smart director in Wes Craven, and a well-selected cast, would this be a dream come true for New Line Cinema? Let's find out. The movie begins with the construction of possibly the most iconic weapon in film, the razor claws. Such a simple idea that Wes went with after considering that claws were one of the oldest weapons in history used against man. Cut to Tina running around a boiler room in a nightgown, having her name called out multiple times before she's attacked by her mystery stalker.
You okay?
No!
Tina sees that she has slash marks on her nightgown, but still manages to go back to sleep. The next morning, we get the first instance of the memorable Freddy jump rope song.
3, 4, then lock your door. 5, 6, grab your crucifix.
It's a great catchy song that is synonymous with the series, but it goes hand in hand with the creepy theme done by composer Charles Bernstein. It's a chilling score that fits well with the tone of the movie. Very dreamlike and innocent, but there's a slight oddity to it that makes you uneasy. On her way to school, Tina meets up with her best friend Nancy, who's with her boyfriend Glenn. While discussing with them about the nightmare she had the previous night, Tina's boyfriend Rod crudely interrupts the conversation.
I had a hard-on this morning when I woke up, Tina. Had your name written all over it.
There's 4 letters in my name, Rod. How could there be room on your joint for 4 letters?
Sounds like Rod doesn't live up to his own name. That night, Tina invites Nancy and Glenn to stay over while her mother is out of town. Nancy takes the time to confess to Tina that she had a similar nightmare about the creep with the razor knives. Just then, a strange noise outside startles the group, and the girls send Glenn to investigate, but it's just Rod messing around with a garden tool. He heads inside with Tina to have some loud makeup sex, much to Glenn's dismay.
I hate it here.
Nancy is being disturbed by someone or something else after a crucifix falls on her while she sleeps. I love this effect, and I think it holds up better than any CGI bullshit that would have and has been used to recreate it. The crew simply put spandex over a hole in the wall and pushed through it. Certainly some eerie imagery. Tina is woken up by more noises outside and has the bright idea to go out by herself. It's down an alleyway where she finally comes face to face with her tormentor.
Please, God.
This is God.
Freddy chases Tina and taunts her with his trademark dark humor, although it's not as quippy as it gets in later sequels. He's able to corner her, and we get to see the effects this nightmare is having in the real world. This may be the first death in the franchise, but it is absolutely my favorite. It's horrific hearing Tina's cries for help as she gets cut open and dragged up the wall by an unseen force. Rod being completely helpless to all of this. The way the crew was able to pull off this effect is awesome.
Everything in the room was nailed down. The cameraman was in like a airplane seat attached to the wall.
It would take a couple of people to just turn that room and actually make it move.
And the kicker is that the girl we thought we were going to spend the rest of the movie with is now gone. You'll see our focus will be shifted to Nancy, who becomes the new protagonist. Ballsy move, but it pays off well. Nancy is taken to the police station after Tina's murder, and her father, Lieutenant Thompson, believes Rod is the culprit after he fled the scene of the crime. He scolds Nancy and his ex-wife Marge for letting her be at Tina's house that night. Nancy defends her decision to be there because Tina was afraid to be alone and needed a friend close by. The following morning, Nancy heads to school when she's jumped by Rod, who tells her he didn't have anything to do with Tina's death. But Lieutenant Thompson is there to break up the chatter.
You gotta ask yourself the question, do I feel lucky? Or do you, punk?
Rod is arrested, but Nancy decides to go to school anyway. Not the best choice, because she falls asleep and in a real unnerving moment sees Tina's dead body calling out to her in a body bag. The bag is dragged down the hallway and Nancy follows the blood, but has a run-in with the hall monitor, who's wearing an awfully familiar attire.
Nancy, no running in the hallway.
The trail leads to a boiler room where Freddy toys with Nancy until she purposely burns her arm to wake herself up in the classroom, the burn mark showing up in real life. That night she visits Rod, who swears his innocence and breaks down, telling her he had a nightmare the night before Tina died about a guy with razor fingers. After hearing this new information, Nancy leaves the cell believing Rod is innocent. Instead of trying to help Rod's case, Nancy goes home and takes a bath, but she has some company join her. I'd be willing to argue that that shot of Freddy's claw reaching up is the most memorable shot in the whole franchise. You show that to anyone and they know exactly where it's from and who's involved. Nancy is briefly dragged underwater, but she manages to escape her bathtub demise. She tries to keep herself awake that night, but when Glenn comes over for a visit, she convinces him to stand guard while she goes looking for someone. She ends up at the police station, witnessing Freddy enter Rod's cell, but he disappears and reappears behind her, chasing her all the way back to her house. There's a neat dream visual here with the sinking into the steps. I think we've all experienced that lack of mobility in our nightmares. Nancy is able to make it back to her room and lock Freddy out.
This is just a dream. He isn't real. He isn't real.
You can run, but you can't hide, bitch!
Nancy's alarm wakes her up, even though that was supposed to be that stupid shit Glenn's job. The two race to the police station to check on Rod, but it's too late as Freddy manages to hang him in his cell, making it look like a suicide. Rod's funeral is a real morbid one since the eulogy insinuates that he was indeed a murderer, but Nancy tells her father that the killer is still on the loose. She describes him as a burnt man with claws, a dirty hat, and a red and green sweater. The looks on her parents' faces give off the impression they know exactly who she's talking about, but her mom takes her to an institute for sleep disorders. While her sleep pattern is studied, she enters another nightmare, but when she's woken up, it's revealed that the hat she ripped off Freddy's head in her dream was pulled out into the real world. The next morning, Nancy gets into a fight with her mom after she tells Nancy the man she's seeing in her dreams can't hurt her because he's dead. So she knew this whole time who Nancy was talking about, but chose not to elaborate on who he was. Quick sidebar here, I love how you see Nancy is starting to go gray in this scene. A nice touch to show just how much damage the lack of sleep is doing to her body. Angry, Nancy storms out of the house and meets up with Glenn on the beautiful palm tree piers of Ohio. The topic of dream theories comes up, and Glenn suggests that turning your back on a monster has the ability to strip them of their power. Nancy would rather use a different method.
I'm setting booby traps. Booby traps. That's what I said, Sam. Setting booby traps in case of anybody's following us.
Arriving home, Nancy notices her mother made a big change with all the bars on the windows and door.
What is this? There's something wrong with the house! I don't like change!
Nancy tries to challenge the redecoration, but instead her mother invites her down to the cellar. She reveals that Fred Krueger was a child murderer who was able to get away with his crimes. The parents banded together and made their own justice by tracking him down and burning him alive. She even managed to snag a souvenir from the moment.
He's dead, honey, because Mommy killed him. I even took his knives.
Marge Thompson has been a real oddball alcoholic up to this point, but in this scene she's freaky. The way she lures Nancy down to the basement to tell her that the man she's been dreaming of is someone she had a hand in killing? She even kept his signature weapon for murdering kids. The whole situation is tragic. The children are paying for the sins of their parents with their own lives, and yet the parents refuse to believe them and instead suggest they sleep, which is just a march to their deaths. That night, Nancy calls Glenn to explain her plan on getting rid of Krueger. After coming to the conclusion that she can pull things out of her dreams, she's going to search for Freddy and latch onto him in her dream, then pull him out into the real world where Glenn will be waiting to take him out. Now, this is a good plan. My only problem is that earlier when she went to go look for Rod and was attacked by Freddy, he was on top of her when the alarm went off and woke her up. She didn't drag him out then. Just seems a little odd she can drag out certain things at different times. Anyways, when Nancy tries to call Glenn back, she's unable to reach him since his parents took the phone off the hook. She rips out her own phone cord in a fit of fear, but still manages to get a call.
Well,
I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy.
That is gross, shocking, and hilarious at the same time. Nancy tries to go rescue Glenn, but her mother has locked up the house and thrown away the key, thwarting her escape. Over at Glenn's, it's exactly midnight and he's about to get a wake-up call. Another amazing death that was pulled off thanks to the rotating room they set up for Tina's death. My only issue is that up to that moment, the previous deaths could be blamed on murder or suicide, eliminating the suspicion that Freddy could be at work. But how the hell is anyone gonna look at a pool of blood and have a rational explanation as to what happened? Still awesome, but in the thick of the story, it doesn't make much sense for Glenn to have this sensational death. Lieutenant Thompson shows up at Glenn's place and takes a call from Nancy, who tells him that she's gonna go after the guy who's been killing everyone. All he has to do is be around when she's got him. It's here she puts her plan into motion and booby traps the house.
This is my house. I have to defend it.
Nancy finally goes to sleep and hunts down Krueger. His claws are now missing from her furnace, and her dead friends call out to her as she meddles around the boiler room. Freddy shows himself, and after a bit of a tussle, she grabs a hold of him and wakes up, discovering that she was unsuccessful in bringing him out with her.
I'm crazy after all.
A chase ensues, but Freddy falls victim to the booby traps, getting hit with a sledgehammer and exploding light bulb. Nancy lures him into the basement, douses him in gasoline, and lights him on fire. This gives her the chance to call for her dad for help, but when he shows up, Freddy has already escaped the cellar and moved upstairs to Nancy's mother. He's attacking Marge while on fire, but after Lieutenant Thompson puts the fire out, all that's left is a charred skeleton that sinks into the bed. Thompson's face during this whole scene is priceless. He's like, Did my ex-wife just turn into a burnt Party City skeleton and disappear into a blue light? God, I gotta lay off the drugs. But Freddy rises up and swears to kill Nancy, but she takes Glenn's advice from earlier and turns her back on Freddy, taking back every bit of energy she gave him. Nancy walks out of the bedroom onto her front porch on a bright, sunny day. Her mom's alive and acting far cheerier than her usual self. Glenn, Tina, and Rod pull up and Nancy joins them. However, the car seems to have a mind of its own and locks everyone in, driving away. Where have I seen that awful effect pop up before?
She's actually here if you want to meet her. Hold on a second. Oh my God, put on a shirt. I told you that you'd be on camera.
My overall thoughts on A Nightmare on Elm Street. It's probably in my top 10 favorite horror films. It's easily one of Wes Craven's best films, maybe just behind Scream, but I'll cover that another day. He wrote such a terrifying story that stood out from the generic slashers being pumped out at the time. It's almost a more brutal take on the story of the Pied Piper who stole the children of the adults who wronged him. The parents did the crime, but the kids paid the price. On a more relatable level, it's scary because of the simple fact that we all have to sleep. If you don't want to run into Jason, just don't go camping. If you don't want to get sliced up by Michael Myers, don't stand in the way of his relatives. With Freddy, you can only stay up as long as possible, but eventually you're going to have your moment of weakness and fall asleep, only to be quickly taken out. Jaws kept people from going into the ocean, and I think A Nightmare on Elm Street definitely kept a lot of people from sleeping. Wes also directed the hell out of this movie, pulling off the incredibly creative sequences he conjured up and spooky imagery. The whole film feels very dreamlike, sometimes making making it difficult to tell whether our characters are awake or in a nightmare. There are only a few kills, but Tina and Glenn have the two most memorable deaths in horror, and that's good enough for me. The effects were well crafted and looked amazing for the most part. Some look kinda goofy by today's standards, and others are just straight up awful, but the good outweighs the bad. That ending is pretty bad, but if Wes had it his way, it would have been a simple happy ending with the kids driving away. It was Robert Shea who had to throw in the final scare to set up a sequel. The cast of characters are great with good performances. You get to know them pretty well and feel sorry for the torment they're suffering through. Nancy is one of the best final girls out there because she says it herself that she's a fighter. She's petrified with her friends getting killed off while the adults refuse to listen to her, but she's still strong, persistent in convincing those around her what's really going on, and capable of figuring out how to stop Freddy. Speaking of, Freddy is seriously an iconic villain in all of cinema, not just horror. From his look to his weapon, motive, and sadistic personality, he's a frightening entity. A monster reborn through the sheer will to get vengeance on those that burned him alive. It's just so evil and a perfect foe for Nancy. Robert Englund definitely provides the scariest performance in this entry since he goes down a more comedic route later. There's not much else I can say. It has its flaws, but this is just a damn good, effective, classic scary movie. I give A Nightmare on Elm Street 5 fedoras out of 5. But what are your thoughts? Do you look at this film as a staple in the genre, or do you have your issues with it? Where does Freddy rank on your list of horror villains? And what was your favorite kill? Don't forget to subscribe and follow my Twitter in the link below. Next week, Freddy returns for a new victim in A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. Until next time, peace.